thank you all for coming. I'm Daniel Schutte. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at the Venture Center. Previously was the Managing Director of our FinTech Accelerator program. So we're in those for a long time. As Mimi mentioned, look, we're here to help everybody. We're a nonprofit. We exist to help entrepreneurs build businesses. That is our sole function. That is our teleological purpose. So please take advantage of us. We're just here to help. That's the only thing we do. So without further on me, I got the easy job tonight. I'm here to ask the hard questions of Zack. And so, Zack, thank you for joining us, man. Sincerely appreciate you taking the time. Absolutely. And so we've known each other for a few years, but instead of me giving the introduction of you, I think it might be a valuable thing for you to kind of just walk through your journey and how you got to where you are today. Broad, huge question, I know, but hitting on the highlights that you think would be valuable for entrepreneurs in the audience.
Okay. Yeah. It all started in 1983. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, number one, I don't like talking about myself. So you're going to have to dig a little bit at times. Yeah. So yeah, I'm the CEO of Few, which if you're not familiar with Few, we are a product design and development company headquartered here in Little Rock. We do websites, mobile apps, web applications, everything that's involved in that process, essentially. A little bit more about me. I'm born and raised in Arkansas. I grew up in Beebe, Arkansas, very small town. To think that I'm doing what I do today probably would blow most people's minds in little town of Beebe. But went to school at Arkansas State in Jonesboro. My whole plan there was to end up working at an ad agency. I thought advertising and marketing was my path. I had a mentor who had done that and went to Arkansas State. I knew exactly what he minored and majored in. I was going down that path, graduated in 2008. And that was a terrible time to enter the job market. No ad agencies were hiring. I talked to a bunch of them. I had great referrals from professors, but yeah, wasn't getting a job. I say this is probably the most critical thing of my path was I got lucky in the sense that I took a design internship while I was still in school at Arkansas Business Publishing Group. That introduced me to those individuals, the people at that organization. They had a small and still have a small digital arm called Flex 360. So when I started reaching out to people, Lance Turner and folks over there and said, hey, I need a job, like anything. No one's hiring right now. Do y'all have anything? They're like, well, our web division is kind of taken off. We need a project manager, design, people, you can talk to people really well. Would that be of interest? And I'm like, I literally just said, I need a job. So yeah, let's do it. Little did I know that was probably the greatest decision I ever made because it set me on a path of working with some very intelligent people in the web. It was a great time to get into that industry. 2008, 2009. You got to think the iPhone came out in 2010. So Flash was dying, dynamic websites were becoming a thing, content management systems were becoming a thing. Just as I got into it, this small web agency was having to learn all that kind of stuff. Mobile became, a prominent piece. So it put me on a path of really being right on the ground floor, right as things were taking off in that realm, Web 2.0 as a whole. So from there, worked there for about 5 years, got an opportunity to go work at an ad agency. So it was kind of like, hey, there's the best of both worlds. But I got the job because of my knowledge in the web. So I went to work for CGRW, was there for about 5 years, built out their kind of digital arm, social media, websites, all that kind of fun stuff. But then had the opportunity or had known the guys at Few. So Arlton Lowry, who's here, who was the chief creative officer and founder of Few, reached out one day and just said, hey, we've been following along what you're doing at CGRW. We've been growing. We need someone to come in and step in and take the lead from an organizational standpoint. And so yeah, that was 2017. I left CGRW and took the CEO role at Few. And then in 2018, I ended up becoming partners with Arlton and buying half the company. So yeah, the rest is kind of growth and history from there. So,
Well, yeah, no, and we'll for sure dive into all that. It's kind of interesting too, because that's such a common story with, especially over the accelerator programs working with, I think it's 90, actually it's 106 now, companies that have gone through the programs. Nobody really chooses at the outset, like,
Oh,
you
no,
know what I
yeah.
want to do? Go start a business. I mean, it
Yeah.
sounds great. And then you dive into it and it turns into something else altogether. And so there's more reluctant entrepreneurs, I think, than there are people who set out to do it, at least that are, successful.
yeah, sometimes it becomes a necessity. It's like, it makes too much sense, or this is really the path that I have to take, or else things are going to fall apart, or I'm never going to know like really what could have come, of this opportunity. So.
Yeah, and Few itself is interesting in that something that I guess is more common now, which is remote work, right? But Few has been since its inception, I believe, totally remote, which is an interesting thing. I think a lot of people in the room will have questions about that, especially those from larger enterprise companies, right? With no real experience with, some of us are maybe digitally native, but even for us, it's sort of strange to work in a totally remote environment. What challenges, I guess I'm going to ask about the challenges, lessons learned, best practices around managing totally remote teams in no particular order.
Yeah. And Few has had office spaces before, and
Right.
we have a new space in the Soma district. But we still operate very much remote first. The idea being that we didn't want to limit ourselves from a talent standpoint or from even a client standpoint to saying, hey, this is our market, this is what we work in. I mean, I worked at an ad agency that claimed, their claim was we're the largest and biggest in the state. And it was like, well, that sounds great, but that's big fish, little pond kind of thing. And no offense to anybody. But that's not really how we wanted to operate. It was like the opportunities are big. We need to think big, but like the idea of trying to make everything work out of an office space in Little Rock or wherever in Arkansas just didn't make sense. And so, but it does come with a lot of challenges, as you mentioned, but also trying to find the right talent and the types of clients that we wanted to grow with. And Arkansas was a challenge all itself. So it was kind of, which challenge do we want to tackle? And at this point, technology had allowed, even pre-pandemic, had allowed for us to be able to kind of expand beyond the borders of Arkansas and really like look for talent that we needed to fit our needs and what we were really looking for. And we wouldn't just become, hey, this is the best we can get, where we're at kind of thing. So it really became a necessity from a talent acquisition standpoint at a certain point, because we're doing pretty complex applications, high-end design. That's what our clients are expecting of us. And just sourcing that talent and finding that locally just became more and more challenging. Just because a lot of times the good folks, which there are plenty of talented, great people in Little Rock and in Arkansas as a whole, but there's also some big companies that know how to lock them down, pay them well, and make them very secure. So it's very tough to find up and coming talent in this market. So it became kind of a necessity.
Well, mother of invention, as it were. So let's talk about that a bit as well, because I know how difficult it is to find talent, especially technical talent. And what a lot of people who haven't run or hired for tech companies may not understand is the difference between truly exceptional tech talents and someone with a degree who's graduated in computer science. There's nothing wrong with that, and they're probably okay and have a base level of skills. But when I've been hiring in the past, and I've probably had 75 senior developers, mid developers kind of under me, first started with Stack Overflow, found the people answering the questions I was asking, went out, recruited them. They were everywhere, from Australia to Chicago to, at this time I was in Indiana still. So that's where we started. Incredibly challenging across different time zones and everything else. But knowing that the difference between, I guess that, and correct me if I'm wrong or your experience is different, but the difference between an exceptional tech talent and, like a mediocre level was, to me, was always like Michael Jordan versus a bench player in the NBA. Still good enough to play in the NBA. But if you want someone to go out there and do it, then you have to have the absolute best. And that does oftentimes mean leaving behind geography. The only other thing to do then, and this is something else I wanted to dive into, if you're not finding the talent to hire kind of out of the box, and I'm sure you do, and they're great when you find them. If you don't, then talent development, upskilling workforce in Arkansas and stuff. Have you guys delved into that realm at all?
Yeah, a little bit. And so, you know, I'll start with the difference between, you know, like that premier tech talent and I say tech, I mean, it's also design. We're very design heavy. So, I mean, you know, and Arlton does a great job of being able to kind of oversee from the design standpoint and really kind of say, hey, this is a style that we don't try to get pigeonholed in style, and we also don't try to get pigeonholed in technology because it, you know, it's constantly changing and shifting. But we look for people who are extremely willing to learn and curious. And maybe like, hey, they're very strong in a particular tech stack, but if we said, hey, you know, there's a difference between the type of person you could say, hey, we really kind of need you to go learn this and lean into this. And that tells us pretty much everything we need to know. If the person is like, okay, let me dig into it. And then there's also the type that'll say, nope, like that's not what I do, you know, kind of thing. And that really defines like what ultimately for us ends up typically being a very strong talent that we can continue to grow and develop. And so the development needs to be a thing that they have to be willing to develop into certain things. But you know, to your point, the Michael Jordan in the NBA, like it's so true. I mean, we have one of our great best developers is in the Netherlands, and like typically we would say, oh well, that's not. I mean, we hire remote, but we're not usually looking overseas or anything like that. He's just that good, and you're like, hey, you know, and he's dedicated, and says what he's going to do, and that's really what we look for. It's not just about the talent. It's those things in sports, they call it the intangibles and stuff like that. It's like, are they willing to, you know, kind of learn certain things? So we're getting a little.
It's okay.
Let it roll.
Let it go.
This is a little overview of some work.
No,
Well, it's a good, I think it's a good primer of, I mean, like, I mean, hopefully, and I guess so I get very proud whenever I see that work because it's like, and it's easy for me to sit up here and kind of look at it as, oh, we got another one? Oh,
the same one. I think that was the next video.
yeah. No, you know, I'm up here as the, hey, we create, or I created, no, it's the premier tech and design talent that we have that led to literally everything that's in that reel. And it's just really like fostering that and finding that to kind of help. And like that, what's so great about that is that reel is, I think, a year and a half, almost 2 years old. So we have all this extra work that's like, that's great stuff, but it's like a whole nother level of just from our development of the talent that we have, and then finding even new talent. And we're constantly, and I'm a sports guy, my business partner really isn't, but like I always use the analogy of like, I'm like, it's a roster. Like we have to kind of evaluate what we have And if we have certain opportunities to bring in more talented and new talent and stuff, and we're not getting what we need, I mean, it's out of what we have to make decisions around that, because it's constantly trying to get better. And a lot of times it's the people we have that are pushing that envelope too.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting thing to kind of manage all the way.
It is. And you guys are growing incredibly rapidly over the past couple of years as well. And we spoke briefly kind of when you arrived about the different challenges that companies have at different kind of trajectories in their scale up. I mean, and so I don't want to leave it too broad and kind of put you on the hook, but I know that it's much easier to go find 7 or 8 people to get something going, right? Because you've been in the industry, you know it, you guys knew each other, you chose to work together. Now you got to go find another 15 people. You know, that's harder to find at the end of it. And so what kind of constraints have you seen around scaling up to meet the demand that you have? And we'll touch on how you get the demand in a minute, but I know that it's there. I know that you're scaling as a company. What new challenges do you have now that you didn't have maybe as a 2, 3, 4-year-old company?
All the challenges. I mean, as compared to, say, 2020, which, it's kind of like one of those things that I look back and I'm like, things happen for a reason. 2020 pandemic, people start to kind of push pause on stuff. Luckily, we never lost a client throughout all of that.
Wow.
But a lot of people were like, well, let's just hold up. Let's just wait and see. Luckily, our team was at like 12 at that time. So, we were able to fill a lot of gaps, went to our clients that were having to respond to the pandemic and say, hey, what do you need? We have people, let's just, deploy them however you need them. But then it was like July 2020, it was like a switch flipped and it just took off. And it was a rocket all the way through to 2021. It was just, how can we keep up? 2022 has been great, but the challenges have been completely different. The margins have been completely different because you have way more overhead. You have way more needs for processes and management that we were so busy just trying to keep up. So that's probably the biggest thing. It's just, I mean, we doubled in size going into 2021. And then now we're sitting at right about 30 full-time employees. I mean, it's a drastic difference between managing 12 and 30. And then we have contractors on top of that we work with for various different types of projects. And so it was necessary for us to take a deep look at, this year and say, how are we managing our resources? How are we approaching some of these projects? Where are we seeing the winners? Where are we seeing the losers from a client standpoint and stuff like that? And just get real with ourselves as far as, because in 2021, it was kind of like you could throw out, and it was just one of those things where we're like, hey, let's just grow, let's ride this. So it was like, hey, let's get new business in as people were coming to us with projects. There wasn't really that filter of, is this a right fit and stuff like that. Yeah. And then, so this year it's been much more focused on what are the right projects? What are the things that we want to do? And what makes sense for us to take on so that we can grow into them.
And is that because you're in a position now to kind of choose your new client base?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think it's now we just feel, I think, a lot more. I mean, there's also a lot of learning experience of just kind of like how we approach certain projects. So I think now we know, after a few conversations with a potential client, is this a good fit for us? Is this not? And we know that if it's not, it's likely we're going to pay for it at some point. It seems like, hey, yeah, it's just revenue. We'll get it in. It may be a little bit painful, but when it all comes down to it, if it's not the right fit or not the right project, it's really just better off not ever even, venturing down that path a lot of times. That's
a tough lesson to learn too, that there's very bad revenue out there. And the problem is it's addictive.
Oh yeah.
And you never get the chance to take a step back and kind of focus on the business.
Yeah.
How about that? This is a good question for anybody starting a company. How do you keep your eye on the kind of strategic while also handling the tactical, like day to day? Like there's a vision for few where it is, I'm assuming that there is, right? And we'll, I guess, get into that too. So you have that, you want to move towards it at all time, but you're putting out fires all day. How do you balance that?
man, if you figure that out, you let me know.
No,
I mean,
I'm
I'll be,
legitimately asking.
yeah, no, I'm legitimately asking you, like, yeah, like, well, I think part of it, I have a great business partner, so it's like we kind of share that burden to a degree. He
Yeah.
holds me accountable, and vice versa. Because it's very easy for me to get into the minutia of the day to day, like a fire pops up and stuff, and you know, and I'm a very, you know, reputation driven. So is Arlt. It's like I don't like people being let down. Like if it's like, hey, this is
Right.
happening, it's on me. We got to figure this out. And I'll be the first one to be like, hey, I know you're busy. I'll take this on, you know, kind of thing. And so it's tough. I mean, it's very tough. But what I try to do is, you know, take some kind of step to the bigger goal every day, you know. And I mean,
Interesting.
there's the terminology of the 1% better every day or
Yeah.
whatever. Same kind of concept. It's like if you can stay consistent with something and moving towards something consistently, you're not going to get there tomorrow, but you will get there eventually. And so as long as those steps are moving forward, that's what I find kind of peace in finding that balance. It's like I typically probably do lean a little bit more into the day-to-day, you know, tactical more than I should. But I think that's everybody. It's right in front of your face. You kind of have to deal with it before you can feel comfortable moving on. But I try to also move the needle, you know, on the big picture items all the time.
That's the real hard part that nobody kind of talks about, is that when you get to a certain scale, everything you did stops working the same way that it did before, and you have to redo all your processes and everything. And they still work, I guess, but they're nowhere near as efficient as they used to be.
Well, and you got new people coming in, and you have to onboard them. You have to, you know, get them used to those processes. And if you don't have them, it becomes abundantly clear when you're onboarding 4 or 5 people in a month, and you're like, well, you're kind of just throwing, and what that does is force you into this cycle of, I have to find somebody that is the Michael Jordan level person, or else they'll fall flat and it's not going to work out, because I need someone that I can give very little direction to and they can kind of take it and run. But what that means is that's more expense, because that's a more expensive person. And things like that. So there's benefits to that, but there's also costs that come along with it. And you can just find yourself in this cycle pretty easily of trying to cover up the fact that you don't have, you know, your processes in place and your operations in order and stuff like that, just because you've been able to kind of patch it with quality talent and great people. And that's great. But that only goes so far. And at a certain point, you have to develop people. What you'll also learn, you know, I've always heard that, you know, it's easy to kind of look at somebody and say, man, this isn't working out. I don't think they can get this job done.
Yeah.
You get all these learning lessons. So maybe you let them go or something, you know, you make a change or something like that, and you're going to bring someone else in. Well, what's funny is that next person usually has the advantage, because you take all those learning lessons and you're like, okay, well, now when we ramp this other person up, we know we need to make sure they know X, Y, and Z.
Right.
That other person never even got the benefit of knowing. They just kind of had to learn on the fly. So it's kind of like, is the problem with the individual, or is the problem with the process and how you're operating? Being able to recognize that is key.
Yeah, it's super interesting, because it's like that rapid iteration startup cycle, right? Except with people's lives, and obviously much more important, but the learnings are there. And
well, it's an injustice, it's a disservice if you don't have that stuff. But that's also what allows you scalability, you know, and it really puts you in a position to be able to say, okay, we can take on this additional project and feel comfortable with it, and it's not stressing everybody out. And we know exactly what needs to happen. And I'll be the first one to tell you, we do not have everything buttoned up, and it's not perfect by any means, but everybody recognizes that that's the steps that we're taking so that we can, you know, we can get there.
Well, yeah, you guys are doing pretty well. Same, so that's good. You talked about onboarding of employees too, and especially in the remote. I go back to that. It's maybe a couple of years old as a topic, but I don't think anybody ever solved for it at the same time. I still see the same challenges in all the businesses. We've worked with several totally native remote companies along the way. Some are better than others at certain things. I never got it right, ever, and I still don't have it right. And every time I've built a culture, it's been on accident. and I haven't given the thought to it and the appropriate ways to do it. You mentioned earlier that one of the key things you hire for the onboarding, if there's best practices, I think everyone should hear that, including me, because I need to know. But also you mentioned you hire as curiosity as a main factor. Are there any other ones that you guys look for when you hire people?
Good questions. So as far as the onboarding process goes, I mean, it's a constantly kind of shifting thing depending on what type of role we're hiring for.
Yeah.
But most of it is, hey, introducing them to how we work in a remote structure. So we're big on Slack. I mean, and you know, everybody is, but like we also have kind of a system in place for how we manage our channels and communication in there. Expectations around if we're doing, you know, some project managers like to have more of a, hey, we're going to have a Zoom stand up and things like that. Some can do more async, but like there's kind of standards around how that needs to work. And also trying to just get them introduced to, you know, the key people. So we have you know, through our growth, we've established, you know, again, just trying to move to a better process and structure. It forced us into having an org chart. It forced us into having some of this stuff that, like, for the longest time, we were just operating flat, which is great in theory. But whenever you get 20 something people, everybody's looking around like, oh, who do I ask for this? Who do I do? And so establishing, this is who you go to for that. This is how we operate. Here's our Notion. Here's where we keep all of our documentation. If you need anything around time entry, around this, around that, here's where you need to go. And it's just having, but then also having leadership. So we have development directors, design directors, a director of delivery, having leadership in place that it's able to kind of own those pieces of that onboarding. And so just making sure that, hey, they're going through this step by step. And then that way I'm not having to kind of come in and say, well, did you get this or did you get that? Like, it's a pretty straightforward process at that point that we have set up. As far as your other question, which, what was the other question?
I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was about, well, we went from onboarding and then it was the remote structure.
It was the remote structure. It was scaling up, and I can't exactly remember, but then I wondered now, as you talked about that, maybe just to continue the thread.
Not to change the subject.
No, but like, and so you're scaling, you're adding these processes and procedures around things that are imperative to your success now, right? With this amount of employees, and will continue to be more so, right? It's exponential as you grow. You're creatives at the same time. And so creatives, in my experience, tend to want freedom and flexibility around kind of everything. Have you seen a big conflict around that? And if so, are there any particular ways to manage it?
I mean, not really. I think the challenge has been trying to stay out of, you know, if everything's so structured or process driven. Well, number one, I can sit up here and talk about it, but it's not often always the reality. Like, yeah, you know, there's definitely rooms for improvement and things like that. But, you know, we operate in a format where we like to let people have, and this, I remember what the other question was. It's like, yeah,
I have a 2-month-old at home, by the way. So
I remember what the other question was. It was curiosity.
Oh yeah.
The other thing was the other thing beyond curiosity is just kind of this idea of self-management, you know, around, especially in a remote environment. Like, if I have to consistently be holding your hand to kind of get something done, or if anybody on our team has to do that, then that's a problem. Like, just straight up. And so to that point, you know, we try to give space. Like, we're not constantly expecting people to be there every minute, you know, responding to Slack messages and stuff like that. We have some designers that like to do more work in the evenings and stuff like that. But the idea is like, if we have things going on that need to be taken care of, everybody's working, like, let's collaborate and actually get the work done. You know, if it becomes a hindrance, that's whenever we have some problems, because, you know, we're not able to get in sync with what your expectations are and what we're getting back, you know, whenever the next morning. So there's challenges there, but I would say, for the most part, we give enough freedom and leeway to allow people to kind of go down a path. Our design directors are great about being able to say, hey, here's a concept, here's a direction, but go play within that and have fun with it and stuff like that. But also you got to remember half of our team, or actually more than half of our team, is developers. So they're very much more structured and things like that.
Yeah.
It's a great balance, and it kind of, because as much as you lean into the creativity, the developers want to hold people, into some kind of structure so they know how they're going to be building something. Like you can't just go wild with design and then go change it the next day and go change it the next day.
Right.
At a certain point, it's got to be finite. It's got to be set so that we can go build it. And so it creates it's an interesting dynamic, but it kind of creates a natural balance.
That is interesting. And one thing I also learned in previous lives is that getting a bunch of Michael Jordans on the team is also, they don't necessarily like to play together.
No, yeah. We have those. Yeah. We're so lucky in which we have extremely talented, like from a director level standpoint, design and development directors that are people who, we talk about talent all the time. These are people who, and our director team is primarily consistent of people in Arkansas.
Yeah.
So it's kind of what's also interesting, but it's been a mix of people who we've worked with in the past or have been at Few for a really long time and just kind of grown in that role and started to own the brand, started to own, setting expectations with other designers and things like that. And so these are people who would be like premier talents anywhere else.
Yeah.
It's not just, and we're so lucky that they're on our team. But part of that is I think there's that freedom that we try to give. Also the buy-in, we try to make sure they're included in a lot of the bigger decisions that we're making. It's not just me and Arlton always making the decisions and stuff like that. And try to let them help guide and build the company that they want to see built, as opposed to us just trying to be the ones forcing it on them. And that's really, it's really the only reason we are able to retain, that talent, is because, and so we've set a great kind of leadership level, and then they're providing a lot of guidance and direction. And then what we've learned is people are trying to aspire to that. That's what they're the ones that are a great fit, going back to the curiosity and self-management. That's what they want. They're thirsty for that knowledge and for somebody like that we have in those direct roles to guide them and say, hey, this is areas you need to lean into. These are areas that, you're doing great at, need improvement at and stuff. And they just eat that up. And so it's a great dynamic.
It is. And it's another thing is, it's interesting that in my experience, and keep me honest, correct me if I'm wrong, but getting better at development of any kind, front end, back end, wherever. There's only one way you get better at it, and it's by developing things.
Yeah.
It's an interesting dynamic. It's not academic in nature, right? You get the fundamentals, but until you're doing it, I guess like a physician with a practice, similar concept. And so having that kind of mentorship and guidance is absolutely critical. That is the way to develop people ultimately.
Yeah. And the ones that in our structure, and the ones that succeed are the ones that lean into that, and it doesn't mean like, oh, this is the greatest code ever or anything like that. It's the ones that are doing it. They're asking the questions, they're communicating. It's clear that they're receiving feedback and they're implementing it, and they're not having to be told the same thing over and over.
Right.
And it sounds very cliche, because that's like everybody sitting here like, yeah, that's what anybody moves up in any company if they act like that. But it's like, you think you take it for granted because you start hiring and you start scaling, and you quickly realize that that's not how everybody operates, and if you want to get to the next level, it doesn't mean you have to be the next level. It means that you have to kind of recognize those steps and start to down that path.
There's some self-awareness there.
And we're here to help. We have team members there to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Mimi, are we okay on time? Okay. Then you talked about business development, bringing in clients. You guys have grown like crazy. How's that happening? Where are they coming from? Yeah.
So far it's been very much organic. That's a good and a bad thing. Myself and Arlton, we we network, we talk with people, get new opportunities and stuff like that. But a lot of times it's our work speaks for itself. So people see that in different ways and formats, or they ask a group like, who built this for you? Who designed this? So we get a lot of referrals in that regard. So it's been very organic, but it creates challenges, especially whenever a lot of the like seeing it through the funnel, you know, is primarily on my plate. And as we talked about earlier, you know, there's that balance of what are the day-to-day tactical things that need to happen? What's the big picture? But also these are things that need to happen to actually create new business and new opportunities. And it can easily become, and I mean, and that's kind of what we're running into this year. It's just becoming like, am I becoming a bottleneck? How do we need to reimagine how we operate and how we create new opportunities? And it's not that we have any problems getting new opportunities. It's like, if we want to get to the level we know we can be at, it's like, that's going to have to kind of depart from just, you know, just being myself or Alton, kind of taking that on.
It's another example of things that don't work at scale.
Exactly.
It's a challenge. It's hard to admit too.
It was great last year, you know, but it's not so much great this year because now we have more people, we have more things to deal with. So you can't constantly be doing the business development efforts like you were, you know, last year or something. So you have to kind of constantly kind of evaluate that and make adjustments.
Yeah, it's easy for me because I was a bottleneck very early at all my companies. Just not very smart. So.
I probably am too, but I'm just more, you know, it's tough for me to give up control on some things.
Yeah.
And I enjoy certain pieces. My favorite part of what I do is the conversations of tell me your problems and let's start kind of thinking through solutions here. How can we even help you? Number one, because that's a lot of that's process of elimination. And then it's just kind of like, okay, here's ways that we could potentially help you and really bring in my background and what I bring to the table and that expertise. And it's not really sales or business development at that point. It's really just trying to help somebody. And I really, really enjoy that piece. And so, yeah, it's tough to kind of give certain pieces of that up.
Oh, we got to stop. Questions?
Sorry. I did say I don't like talking about myself.
No, you didn't. I ask great questions is the problem.
I don't want to have a question, just it's just great to hear a lot of the same stuff that you've already gone through, we're coming up to as well. So it feels comforting to hear like 95% of what you said is things that jive with how we're operating as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly, I'm not the first one, and, you know, and like, it's being able to kind of recognize and kind of find the path you need to go down and get very focused. I mean, it's also easy to get distracted at times. And so, yeah, it's a constant kind of just balancing act and being able to kind of be self-aware of kind of what makes sense.
Yeah, that's the hard part, is kind of growing out of being an individual contributor and being the owner of the company and leader. And it'll see where you're getting too much minutia, you're working too much with fires, and sitting back and doing the strategic thinking. So this was like chicken soup for me. Just listen to you talk about that. So
Cool. Happy. Yes, sir.
So one of the things out here, you go through the business development process and deploying plans and things like that. Do you have some part that you actually devote to innovation in your space, or do you let your clients run?
That's a great question. I mean, most of our innovation is kind of more around tech stack and new technologies. And so like, as it relates to how we approach doing certain activities. So whether they design, so just even the last like year and a half or so, it's like, you know, right about a year and a half ago, everything was designed in Sketch and put into, you know, another app for prototyping and stuff. Now Figma's taken over. So but we were one of the first ones. I mean, I don't think any other design shops or agencies in Arkansas really have fully gone into Figma. Now, when we talk to shops in Chicago, San Francisco, the expectation is you work and you deliver stuff in Figma if you're, you know, and stuff like that. And so most of our innovation is kind of leaning in on platforms, technology, You know, where are things going in the JavaScript world? Where are things going here and there and stuff? And so, but as far as like innovation around product and stuff like that, you know, most of that is sparked by a client coming in and they have a unique challenge. Now, our job is to kind of say, how can we bring an innovative solution to the table, and really kind of dig in with them on that.
Go step further on that is, do you give your employees an opportunity to kind of have a little bit of what we call innovation time where they can go explore?
Yeah, I mean, we do. I don't know if it's a formalized thing, but we kind of similar to like we were talking about a moment ago. It's kind of just giving some rope and just saying, okay, well, we know what the problem is. Like, let's spend some time exploring some potential, you know, solutions and ideas and how we could potentially approach the problem. You know, and also we look for opportunities to kind of like have projects that are just maybe not big money makers or whatever, but they're kind of more fun. They're more of a playground. We announced today that we acquired another another digital agency called Perch. It's a local company, not a big agency by any means, but part of that was twofold. It was for us to get our feet wet in that space of just trying to be like, this is a small group. We know the people we're getting involved in here. We can kind of take our time and like go through this acquisition process and learn what that looks like, because who knows, we might want to do a bigger look at a bigger opportunity down the road. But also it was like, we've decided we're going to retain that brand, and there'll be more to come on that as far as like what we plan with that brand and the direction we want to go. But it's going to be kind of a unique siloed service offering. And what we told our design directors was just like, do what you want with it. Like we already have a set brand with Few and what we do and stuff like that. But as far as like, you know what we're doing here from a brand, from a style standpoint, from a director, like just go have fun, do whatever you want. All the stuff you don't think we can get away with our Few brand and we want to be careful with, this is a playground to go have fun, you know, stuff. So a little bit of work.
That's a URL.
Workwithperch.com. So the company's called Perch, and it's workwithperch.com. You can sign up there to get alerts on the next iteration when we announce what's that service offering there.
If there's no more, that might be a good lead into what's the best way for people to get in contact with you guys.
Yeah, you can visit our website, few.io. My email is Zach@few.io. It's Arlton@few.io. It's probably the best way of going about it. Just email or hit us up on the website. Those come directly to me. So, you know, again, it's hard for me to give up control.
I know, man. All right. Well, Zach, thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen. Zack Hill.
Thanks, everybody.